Christian Cage wins world title. Peeps rejoice at TNA against all odds. 2006 review. Christian Cage winning the NWA World Heavyweight Championship at TNA against all odds. 2006 should have been wrestling's greatest redemption story, but what actually happened that night exposes the most infuriating truth about professional wrestling. Christian was handed this moment as WWE's reject, performing in front of a fraction of the audience he deserved, in a company that would waste his prime years before sending him back to WWE where he'd be buried again. And here's what's going to make you absolutely lose your mind. Christian winning the title on February 12, 2006 wasn't TNA giving him the respect he earned, it was WWE's failure to recognize his talent forcing him to prove his worth in a smaller pond, and 20 years later, it still represents everything wrong with how wrestling treats its most underrated performers. Because the Peeps rejoicing that night? They were celebrating a consolation prize. Christian should have been WWE champion years before this. Instead, he had to leave the biggest company in wrestling, rebuild his credibility, and win a championship that is prestigious as it was represented what he couldn't accomplish in WWE rather than what he achieved in TNA. Let's rewind to early 2006 and understand the context of why Christian Cage in TNA was simultaneously the best and most frustrating thing happening in wrestling. Christian had left WWE in November 2005 after years of being positioned just below the main event level. He was Intercontinental Champion multiple times. He had classic matches. He was over with fans. He had everything needed to be world champion, but WWE saw him as Edge's tag team partner, as the other guy in the Edge-rated partnership, as someone who was good for the midcard but didn't have that indefinable IT factor that WWE demanded from their world champions, which is code for he didn't look like what Vince McMahon wanted his champion to look like. So Christian left, and instead of WWE realizing they'd made a catastrophic mistake, they basically shrugged and moved on. Meanwhile, TNA signed Christian and immediately positioned him as a main event player, giving him the respect WWE had denied him for years. Against all odds 2006 was built around Christian Cage versus Jeff Jarrett for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. Jarrett was the final boss of TNA, the company founder who'd held the title multiple times and represented TNA's established order. Christian was the invader from WWE, bringing mainstream credibility and proving he belonged at the top. The match itself was exactly what it needed to be. Christian and Jarrett worked for over 20 minutes, telling a story of the hungry challenger against the entrenched champion who would do anything to keep his position. Jarrett worked heel, using every shortcut and advantage. Christian worked from underneath, showing heart and resilience that made fans believe in his journey. The Orlando crowd, TNA's home base at the Impact Zone, was molten for Christian. Every near fall got massive reactions. Every comeback spot had fans on their feet. This wasn't just about a title change, this was about validation for Christian Cage as a main event wrestler, something WWE had refused to acknowledge. When Christian hit the unprettier, his finisher, and got the 3 count, the crowd erupted. Commentary was losing their minds. Christian's Peeps, his fanbase that followed him from WWE, were celebrating like their guy had finally gotten justice after years of being overlooked. But here's what makes this moment simultaneously great and deeply frustrating. Christian was 32 years old, in his prime. And he had to leave the biggest wrestling company in the world to get this moment in front of maybe 1,000 fans in the Impact Zone instead of 15,000 fans at a WWE pay-per-view. Christian's NWA World Heavyweight Championship reign in TNA was excellent from a pure wrestling perspective. He had great matches with Abyss, Samoa Joe, Sting, and others. He proved he could carry a company as the top champion. He showed personality, charisma, and in-ring excellence that WWE had wasted. But and this is the infuriating part, TNA in 2006 was getting maybe 1 million viewers on Spike TV. Their pay-per-views did maybe 20,000 to 40,000 buys. Meanwhile, WWE was getting 4 to 5 million viewers on Raw and SmackDown, and their pay-per-views were doing 200,000 plus buys. Christian was proving he was world champion material, but he was doing it in a context where relatively few people were watching. It's like being the best actor in independent films when you should be starring in blockbusters. The performance is great, but the platform limits the impact. And WWE? They were pushing people like the Great Khali, Bobby Lashley, and others who had a fraction of Christian's talent but fit Vince McMahon's size obsession. Meanwhile, Christian was having 4-star matches in TNA that maybe 50,000 people bought on pay-per-view. Here's the uncomfortable reality that Christian's biggest fans don't want to acknowledge. The Peeps rejoicing at Against All Odds 2006 were celebrating a compromise. Yes, Christian won a world title. Yes, he proved WWE wrong, but he proved them wrong in a way that WWE could easily dismiss because it happened in TNA, not on WWE's stage. When Christian eventually returned to WWE in 2009, did WWE treat him like a former world champion who'd proven himself as a main eventer? No. They put him in ECW, then gave him exactly 2 days as World Heavyweight Champion before taking it away and never giving him that level push again. WWE's message was clear: what you did in TNA doesn't matter. Winning the NWA World Heavyweight Championship doesn't make you a main eventer in our company. And Christian spent the rest of his WWE career as a very good upper mid-card wrestler who occasionally touched the main event but was never truly positioned as the top guy. So when we celebrate Christian winning it against All Odds 2006, we're celebrating a moment that was necessary because WWE failed him, but also limited because TNA couldn't give him the platform his talent deserved. It's a bittersweet victory that represents everything frustrating about wrestling's talent evaluation. But let's also talk about how TNA wasted Christian's championship reign and ultimately his entire run. Christian held the NWA title for about 4 months before losing it. Then TNA created their own world title and Christian won that too, but the booking around him was increasingly chaotic. TNA in 2006 to 2008 was notorious for terrible creative decisions. They brought in every WWE reject and immediately pushed them over homegrown talent. They did crash TV with no long-term planning. They put the title on Christian but surrounded him with storylines that made no sense and undermined his championship credibility. Christian should have been TNA's version of what CM Punk became in WWE, the guy who came from outside, proved the establishment wrong, and led a new era. Instead, TNA used him as a transitional champion and credibility booster for whatever new shiny toy they were pushing that month. The promotion that should have been built around Christian Cage, Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, and their incredible roster instead kept chasing WWE's formula and WWE's castoffs, never fully committing to the talent that made them special. Looking back 20 years later, Christian's against all odds victory represents lost potential more than triumph. Christian Cage was world champion for a total of about 18 months across multiple TNA title reigns. He had great matches. He proved his worth. But compare that to Edge, his former tag team partner. Edge became a megastar in WWE. Multiple world championships, WrestleMania main events, Hall of Fame career. The guy who was positioned as Christian's equal in their tag team became one of WWE's biggest stars while Christian was proving himself in TNA to smaller audiences. Was Edge more talented than Christian? Debatable. Edge had the look WWE wanted. Edge was willing to be more ruthless in storylines. Edge got opportunities and ran with them. But talent-wise? Christian was absolutely in Edge's league, and many would argue Christian was the better pure wrestler. So against all odds 2006 is this weird moment where Christian gets vindication, but it's vindication that ultimately doesn't matter in the larger wrestling landscape because WWE, the company that actually controlled mainstream wrestling consciousness, never fully acknowledged it. For Christian's Peeps' dedicated fanbase, against all odds 2006 was everything. It was their guy finally getting the respect he deserved, finally being positioned as the guy instead of someone's tag team partner or midcard champion. And that joy was real and valid. Christian's fans had watched him be overlooked for years. They'd seen him deliver incredible performances in ladder matches, tag matches, singles matches, always excellent, never quite getting to the top. So when he won that NWA title, it felt like justice. But here's the frustrating part, those same fans had to watch Christian's subsequent WWE return get wasted. Had to watch him win the World Heavyweight Championship at Extreme Rules 2011 only to lose it 2 days later on SmackDown to Randy Orton in a move that basically said, "We're giving you this moment but you're not really our guy." Had to watch Christian deliver incredible heel promos during his 2011 run, some of the best character work of that era, only to be positioned as a transitional champion and mid-level challenger rather than a true main eventer. So celebrating against all odds 2006 requires acknowledging it was a consolation prize for a career that should have been so much more. Christian Cage winning the NWA World Heavyweight Championship represented several things simultaneously. 1. Validation that Christian was main event caliber despite WWE's refusal to position him there. 2. TNA's ability to capitalize on WWE's mistakes by signing and pushing rejected talent. 3. The limitation of that validation because it happened outside WWE's mainstream bubble. 4. A glimpse of what could have been if WWE had recognized Christian's talent earlier. 5. A reminder that size bias and the look still mattered more than talent in WWE's evaluation. It's a moment that's both triumphant and tragic depending on your perspective. Triumphant if you focus solely on that night in Orlando. Tragic if you consider what Christian's career should have been with proper support from WWE. Ultimately, Christian's against all odds victory exposes how professional wrestling fails its most talented performers. Christian was excellent in the ring, great on the microphone, over with fans, reliable and professional. Versatile across multiple styles and roles, but he was 6 feet 1 inch instead of 6 feet 4 inches. He was good looking but not Vince McMahon's idea of a leading man. He was excellent but not larger than life in the specific way WWE demanded. So he had to leave WWE, prove himself in TNA, win their world championship, have great matches, show he could draw and perform at the top level, and still when he returned to WWE, they treated him as a mid-level talent who'd get occasional main event shots but never the sustained push his talent deserved. It's infuriating because it represents a pattern. Daniel Bryan had to leave WWE and become a star elsewhere before WWE took him seriously. Drew McIntyre had to rebuild in the independents. Even CM Punk's rise happened partially despite WWE rather than because of them. Christian Cage winning the NWA World Heavyweight Championship at TNA against All Odds 2006 should be remembered as a pure triumph, the underdog getting his moment, the overlooked talent proving everyone wrong. And for that one night in Orlando, it was triumphant. The Peeps did rejoice. Christian did prove he belonged at the top. But 20 years later, that victory is bittersweet because it represents what Christian accomplished despite the wrestling industry's failures rather than because of its support. He was world champion in TNA when he should have been world champion in WWE. He proved his worth to 1 million viewers when he deserved to prove it to 5 million. Christian Cage's career is a tragedy wrapped in occasional triumphs, moments of validation that remind us what could have been if wrestling actually rewarded talent over arbitrary preferences. Against All Odds 2006 gave us a glimpse of Christian as the guy, and it was excellent. But it also reminds us that he deserved so much more. What's your take on Christian's TNA run? Should he have been WWE champion in 2005? Did TNA waste his prime years too? Does his Hall of Fame induction validate his career or highlight what was missing? Sound off in the comments because Christian's legacy is still debated. If this deep dive gave you new perspective on a forgotten classic, smash that like button. Subscribe to Wrestling News CC for more wrestling history that challenges the mainstream narrative. Christian won it against all odds, the Peeps rejoiced, but the real story is what wrestling denied us by never fully embracing one of